Good evening, my friends, and welcome back to this quiet journey through the forgotten corners of our world, a place where we slow down, breathe a little deeper, and let old stories help us drift gently toward rest. And tonight we travel far to the northeast, into a land where winter is not just a season but a force that shapes the way people live, breathe, work, and even sleep. There is only one thing you need to remember about Yakutia. The cold is not simply cold, it is something deeper, something that touches the bones of the earth itself, and during nights that fall to roll 76 degrees Celsius, people did not just go to sleep, they prepared for it as though preparing for a long, carefully measured ritual of survival. And now, with that in mind, let's step quietly inside a traditional Yakut home and see how families endured those impossible nights without freezing to death. Long before anyone lay down to rest, the entire evening was shaped by a slow, almost meditative routine built around warmth, and everything inside the house revolved around the stove, the single most important object in a Yakut winter. It stood in the center like a guardian of the night, its iron walls glowing faintly red, and the family checked it again and again, knowing that even a small drop in heat could turn a room into a frozen chamber before dawn. Birch logs were split in advance, stacked in careful piles near the stove, and the fire was fed in intervals that had been learned over generations. Not too much, not too little, just enough to last through hours of darkness. The bed itself was not a simple piece of furniture but a layered sanctuary built with intention. At the bottom stood a raised wooden platform, because the cold of a Yakut floor could swallow warmth like a living creature. Over it, reindeer hides were spread with the fur facing upward, their hollow hairs capturing heat the way snow traps air. On top of that came thick wool blankets, slightly smoky from the stove's breath, and above everything lay a heavy quilt that held both insulation and memory, often stitched together over decades from scraps of old coats, dresses, and woven cloth that once belonged to ancestors. Families did not sleep scattered as we do today. They slept as a single unit. Children, the most vulnerable to cold, were always placed in the center, cocooned between parents and relatives whose body heat created a living barrier against the Arctic air. Adults slept at the edges, forming a protective ring, their backs facing outward toward the cold walls of the house. Dogs sometimes curled near the doorway or the stove, adding a small but essential layer of warmth to the fragile balance inside. Before lying down, the adults checked the windows, brushing away delicate frost patterns that sealed the glass like lace, and they hung thick felt sheets over them, muting drafts and dimming the harsh moonlight. The door was sealed with strips of fur tucked tightly into the frame, so that not even the faintest thread of freezing air could slip inside. A kettle of tea was left near the stove, not for drinking but simply to keep it from turning solid overnight. And when everything was ready, the fire humming softly, the hides warming under the first breaths of heat, the blankets heavy and inviting, the family lay down slowly, listening to the wood crack under the strain of the cold outside, feeling the quiet settle over them like another layer of insulation. Sleeping in Yakutia was never taken for granted. It was an exercise in careful preparation, a nightly agreement with the Arctic that warmth must be protected, shared, and never wasted. Even after the beds were prepared and the fire maintained with watchful precision, the Yakut people understood that what they wore to sleep mattered as much as the blankets themselves, because in a land where the air outside could crystallize a man's eyelashes within seconds, clothing was not a layer, it was a lifeline. They slept wrapped in traditional garments made from fur and thickly felted wool, clothing so dense and insulating that it seemed almost alive, breathing with them, as it trapped every ounce of warmth their bodies could produce. The soft inner layers were made from reindeer hide, chosen for its remarkable ability to hold heat even when touched by frost, while the outer layers were woven wool garments that smelled faintly of the smoke that had seasoned them over countless winters. Children were often dressed in multiple layers of tiny tunics and fur wraps, and older family members tied belts made of braided horsehair around their waists, to keep the layers pressed closely to their bodies, preventing precious warmth from escaping into the cold air of the room. Many families used long tube-like woolen socks that reached nearly to the knees, and these were never removed at night because bare skin was a vulnerability, something exposed to the cold in a way that no one dared risk. Even hair was braided before sleep so it would not freeze to the blankets, and hands were often tucked under layers of fur or inside mittens, ensuring that fingers, always the first to lose heat, stayed warm enough to move freely by morning. Because the nights were long and silent, people learned to become their own sources of warmth. They slept close enough to hear each other breathe, close enough that the combined heat of several bodies created a warm pocket of air under the blankets, a fragile bubble that needed only the slightest disruption to collapse into chill. If a child became cold, an adult would draw them closer without waking, and if someone shifted too far to the edge, another person pressed gently inward, restoring the human circle that kept everyone alive. Body heat was not just warmth. It was a shared responsibility, a silent agreement that every breath and every heartbeat contributed to the survival of the group. It was said in old Yakut tradition that a person alone is a candle in the wind, but a family together is a small sun, and nowhere was this more true than during those 76-degree Celsius nights, when even the walls of the home groaned like living creatures under the weight of the cold. Sleep, for the Yakut people, was not isolation. It was togetherness shaped by necessity, a nightly reminder that in the harshest climate on Earth, survival was a team effort woven into the simplest act of closing one's eyes. In a place where the darkness of winter stretched endlessly across the horizon, and the outside world froze so deeply that even the trees cracked open like old bones, the fire inside a Yakut home was more than a source of heat. It was the heart of the household, a constant companion that needed tending even while everyone slept, because one fading ember could turn the night from cold to fatal in a matter of minutes. Families understood that the difference between warmth and disaster lay in steady, disciplined firekeeping, and so every household developed its own quiet rhythm for feeding the stove throughout the night, a rhythm passed down through generations like an inheritance carved from necessity. The eldest or the strongest in the family often took the first shift, lying closest to the stove with one hand resting on a wooden stick used to adjust the logs, waking at regular intervals guided not by clocks but by instinct, by the subtle change in the quality of the room's warmth, by the faint shift in the sound of burning wood when the fire grew hungry. When their turn ended, they nudged the next guardian gently, and the exchange was so quiet and practiced that it hardly disturbed the heavy layers of blankets or the slow breathing of those in the center of the bed. Birch wood was preferred for the nighttime burn, not only because it was abundant, but because it produced a strong, steady heat with a distinctive smell that clung to clothing and bedding like a familiar comfort. People learned to split the logs to precise sizes so they would burn neither too quickly nor too slowly, maintaining a careful balance that kept the room warm without wasting precious fuel. The stove stones, heated throughout the day, radiated warmth long after the fire dimmed, but even they had limits, cooling rapidly in the grip of a 76 degrees full cold, and so the firekeeper moved deliberately, placing logs one by one, closing the iron door, and listening for the reassuring crackle that meant the warmth would hold a little longer. Sometimes, during the deepest stretch of the night, the house would fall so silent that the only sound was the faint pop of resin inside the wood, and in those moments the firekeeper would sit for a few breaths on the edge of the raised bed, feeling the heat kiss their face as the cold pressed against their back, a reminder that only a few centimeters of wood stood between life and the unforgiving Arctic air. They would look toward the sleeping forms under the heavy blankets, see the rise and fall of slow breaths, and understand that this small, glowing hearth was the sole guardian against the vast winter waiting outside. In Yakutia, to let the fire die was unthinkable, almost a betrayal, because the cold outside showed no mercy, and the warmth inside existed only because someone gave up a portion of their sleep to protect it. And so the night passed in a gentle cycle of rest and vigilance, fire and breath, warmth and shadow, a balance so delicate that even a small mistake could have changed everything. Even with warm bedding, layered clothing, shared body heat, and a carefully tended fire, sleep in Yakutia would have been impossible without the unique architecture of the homes themselves, because in the world's coldest inhabited region, a house was not just a shelter but a finely tuned instrument designed to preserve warmth in places where the night could freeze boiling water in seconds. The Yakut people understood the behavior of cold as deeply as others understand wind or rain, and their homes reflected centuries of adaptation to brutal temperatures that made ordinary structures useless. Traditional houses were built from larch logs, a wood so dense and resin-rich that it resisted cracking in cold that would have shattered lesser timber, and these logs were fitted tightly together using a method that allowed them to settle naturally over time, closing gaps that might have let drafts slip through. The walls grew thicker with every generation, many layers deep, packed with moss that acted as natural insulation, holding warmth inside the way a thermos bottle cradles heat. The result was a wooden shell that sighed and creaked in the frost but held firm, a barrier between the human world and the icy vastness outside. The windows were small, often no larger than a man's forearm because glass was fragile in the cold and large openings leaked precious heat. So families reduced them to narrow slits that let in a pale blue light during the short winter days, but offered no invitation to drafts. Thick felt curtains hung over them at night, doubling the insulation and trapping warmth inside. Doors were built low and heavy, pushed tightly into frames lined with layers of fur and cloth, so that closing them felt like sealing the entrance to a snow fort, a slow and deliberate movement that shut out the Arctic air in one final thud. Inside the home, the layout was designed around the principle of heat rising and cold sinking. The main sleeping platform was always raised, sometimes by several feet, so that families could rest in the warmest layer of air available, while the floor, often freezing even with a fire burning, was used for storing food or placing buckets of water that would still freeze overnight. The stove sat in the center, not along a wall, because the Yakut understood that warmth radiates evenly outward, and a central fire meant that every corner of the room received its share of heat, even if just barely. Many homes had double walls or interior partitions that trapped pockets of warm air, creating a buffer against the cold. In the smallest villages, people even insulated their roofs with layers of sod and earth, letting snow pile onto them throughout the winter. The snow, strangely enough, acted as a second layer of insulation, locking in heat the way a blanket settles over a sleeping body. In this way, nature's own weapon, the cold and the snow was turned into a shield used to survive it. And so, when families finally lay down under their blankets, drifting slowly towards sleep, they did so knowing that the house around them was quietly performing its own work, holding warmth, resisting frost, breathing softly with the fire, and standing watch through a night that stretched long beyond what most of the world can imagine. The structure was not simply a building, it was the second guardian of their rest, the silent partner that allowed them to close their eyes without fear. Even after the fire was tended, the beds arranged, the clothing layered, and the house sealed against the cold, families in Yakutia still had to contend with something almost invisible yet constantly present, the breath of the night itself, the quiet exchange between warm human air and the frozen world outside, that created an environment where every exhale left a mark, every whisper of moisture hardened into frost on the walls, and even the act of breathing carried its own peculiar dangers. In temperatures as low as 76 degrees, warm air instantly crystallizes, so the interior of a Yakut home became a miniature universe of shimmering frost patterns, delicate feathers forming on wooden beams, on the edges of blankets, and even in the corners of the room where cold gathered like a silent visitor waiting to seep in. As families slept, their breath rose upward in soft, cloud-like plumes that condensed immediately, settling on the ceiling as a thin, glassy sheen that sparkled in the dim glow of the stove. Over long nights, these layers thickened slowly, creating patches of frost so dense they looked like frozen paint strokes, and in the morning when the sun returned, Brief, pale and faint, the frost would melt just slightly before refreezing, forming strange shapes that resembled flowers in winter. People were accustomed to waking up to the faint crackle of frost, loosening from the rafters, falling in tiny glittering flakes onto blankets or the stove's iron top. But this beauty hid a real challenge. The moisture in one's breath could create small pockets of cold right above the sleeping area, and these descending droplets, though cold, were less dangerous than what happened if the temperature inside rose too quickly. In homes where the stove burned too hot, melting frost dripped onto bedding and soaked into blankets. Once the fire died down even slightly, that moisture froze stiff, turning soft hides into brittle sheets that could steal warmth from a sleeping body. Families learned to regulate the fire not only for heat, but also for humidity, striking a fragile balance that kept the air dry enough to prevent dangerous condensation, but warm enough to maintain life. Adults learned to position their faces so that their breath drifted away from the coldest corners of the room. Children slept with heads tucked beneath blankets, leaving only a small opening for air, because a single exposed cheek could become painfully cold, stiffening with frost by morning. Sometimes, after extremely long nights, people woke with tiny crystals in their eyebrows, in their eyelashes, or even in their hair, the frozen remnants of their own breath that had settled back upon them. Dogs, always attuned to danger, shifted closer to the stove when frost thickened too much on the walls, acting as early warning signs that something in the room's balance had shifted. And so, in Yakutia, sleeping through Arctic nights was more than a matter of warmth. It was a process of living inside a delicate exchange between human heat and the frozen air that pressed constantly at the house's edges. The night breathed along with the people inside, and every inhale and exhale created a small transformation in the room, a dance of warmth and cold that shaped how rest unfolded under the heavy blankets. Even with a strong fire, thick reindeer hides, and a carefully sealed home, the people of Yakutia understood something that many survivalists today have rediscovered only through hardship. In the coldest places on Earth, animals were not merely companions or sources of labor, but partners in survival, sharing their warmth with the humans who cared for them. In a region where winter stretched for more than half the year, and temperatures could drop so low that metal shattered and leather froze stiff, the body heat of animals often meant the difference between life and death, especially in the long, deep hours of night. Dogs were the most familiar of these nighttime guardians. The Yakutian Laika, a hardy northern breed, with thick fur, keen instincts, and an uncanny ability to sense temperature changes before humans could feel them, often slept near the door or beside the stove, positioning themselves where their warmth provided the most benefit to the household's fragile thermal balance. When cold drafts slipped under the door, a dog would shift instinctively, pressing its body against the gap as though acting as a living shield, and families trusted this silent cooperation without ever needing to speak of it. Children, especially the youngest, often curled beside the dogs, burying their hands in the warm fur and falling asleep to the soft vibrations of a creature bred to withstand the Arctic night. Horses, though much larger and usually kept in separate shelters, played their own role. In the harsher centuries of Yakutian history, when winters were even more severe than they are today, people sometimes built barns directly against the walls of their homes, allowing the animals' heat to radiate inward. The act of breathing from several large animals, combined with the warmth of their bodies pressed close together in confined spaces, created a stable pocket of warmth that seeped through wooden planks, raising the temperature inside the home by a few crucial degrees. In a world where life and death were separated by tiny margins, even a single degree could be enough to keep frostbite from creeping into fingertips and toes during the night. In remote settlements, cattle and horses sometimes shared the same structure as the family during the coldest spells, though separated by partitions. This wasn't an act of desperation, but a practiced strategy rooted in centuries of observation. Animals generated a constant, reliable heat that did not depend on firewood or human vigilance, and the combined warmth of many bodies human and animal created a microclimate far more stable than any stove alone could produce. The rhythm of their breathing, the faint shifting of hooves on straw, and the low rumble of their sleep added a strange, comforting presence in the night, reminding people that survival in this climate was a communal effort that included every living being under their roof. And in the mornings, when the frost softened slightly and the first pale light returned to the sky, families often thanked their animals with quiet gestures. An extra handful of hay, a warm touch to the muzzle, or a thick layer of straw refreshed in the shelter. In Yakutia, gratitude for warmth was always shared, because everyone, humans, horses, dogs, had endured the night together, forming a silent alliance against the cold that waited just beyond the door. Even as the fire burned steadily and the blankets held layers of precious warmth, the people of Yakutia relied on another, often invisible source of heat during the long 76-degree Ceph nights. The warmth generated from within their own bodies, fueled by food that was heavy, dense, and rich in fats. In a land where the cold consumed energy faster than hunger could ever announce itself, the Yakutu people learned that eating the right foods before sleep could mean the difference between waking comfortably or failing to wake at all. And so the evening meal was not merely nourishment, but a form of preparation for the night's descent into deep Arctic stillness. Traditional meals were built around fatty meats, fish rich in oils, and warming broths that simmered for hours on stoves, filling the small wooden homes with the scent of nourishment. Horse meat, reindeer, and fatty cuts of beef were common in winter, sliced into thick pieces that held warmth long after cooking. Frozen fish, especially whitefish and salmon, was eaten raw or lightly thawed, still dense with nutrients and oils that provided slow-burning energy throughout the night. People understood instinctively that fat was not a luxury but a necessity, a kind of internal insulation that kept the body burning warm even as outside air tried to pull heat away. Before bedtime, families often shared a small bowl of warm broth or tea infused with herbs gathered during the brief summer, and this ritual did more than soothe the spirit. It prepared the body for hours of cold. The warmth of the liquid spread through the chest and stomach, and as the body digested it slowly, heat radiated outward like the soft glow of embers beneath a blanket of ash. Children received especially rich portions with added butter or animal fat stirred into their bowls, because their smaller bodies lost heat more quickly and needed every possible reserve to stay warm while they slept. Some families even kept small containers of melted animal fat near the stove, dipping bread or frozen fish into it before sleep to fortify themselves against the night. This wasn't seen as indulgence, but as a calculated strategy, one perfected over centuries in a place where calories were not just food, they were survival. And as the families lay down beneath the heavy reindeer hides, the warmth generated from their meal continued to work silently, a kind of internal fire that burned steadily through the deepest hours of darkness. In the stillness of these nights, when the house creaked under the pressure of the frost, and the stove glowed softly in the center of the room, people felt the warmth gather slowly in their chests, spreading outward like a quiet reassurance that their bodies were prepared for whatever the cold might bring. And though the Arctic night outside showed no mercy, inside the home the combination of shared body heat, layered bedding, careful firekeeping, and the slow-burning warmth of rich food created a pocket of safety where sleep could finally come. Even with the body fed, the fire carefully tended, and the blankets layered in thick folds of fur and wool, the people of Yakutia still faced another challenge each night: the immense, almost overwhelming silence of the Arctic winter, a silence so deep and absolute that it could unsettle even the strongest mind if one was not accustomed to it. In this far northern world, night did not simply fall, it consumed everything, covering the landscape in darkness so complete that it felt as though the sky had folded itself over the earth, and the only remaining sound was the faint whisper of frost forming on the windows. Inside the houses, after the family settled into their sleeping places, and the room grew still, the silence became another layer of the night, heavy and ever-present. The creaking of the wooden walls, strained by the biting cold, sounded like distant sighs. The soft crackle of the stove's embers became the most familiar companion, and the gentle rhythm of human breathing, the rise and fall of chests beneath blankets, was the only reassurance that life continued in a world otherwise muted by winter. For someone unaccustomed to such quiet, it could feel eerie or even unsettling, but for the Yakut people, this silence was a signal, a reminder that the time for work had ended and the time for rest had begun. Sleep required a mindset shaped by centuries of adaptation. People learned to welcome the stillness rather than resist it, to let the silence settle inside them like a soft snowfall, covering worries and thoughts with a blanket of calm. The Arctic night allowed no room for restlessness. One had to surrender fully to the quiet, accepting it as part of the rhythm of life. There was a saying among the elders that the silence of winter is a teacher, and indeed many believed that the long nights helped cultivate patience, inner strength, and the ability to endure hardship with dignity. Even children grew up understanding that noise wasted warmth. Speaking softly, moving slowly, and settling early were part of the nightly ritual. Parents often told their children that too much movement under the blankets would let the cold in, a gentle way of teaching them the value of stillness. As the room fell deeper into quiet, the darkness outside seemed to press closer against the house. But instead of feeling afraid, families felt protected, wrapped in the shared understanding that this silence was their companion, not their enemy. And in this deep quiet, thoughts stretched out like long shadows. People drifted towards sleep, not quickly but gradually, letting the warmth of the fire, the closeness of their family, and the rhythm of the night guide them downward into a state somewhere between waking and dreaming. The silence was so complete that even the faint crack of a shifting log in the stove sounded monumental, a reminder that life existed inside even the smallest sounds. Thus, in the coldest inhabited region of the planet, sleep was not simply about closing one's eyes, it was about accepting the stillness, aligning one's heartbeat with the quiet around them, and finding comfort in a world where even sound seemed to freeze. Even though the warmth of shared beds, the steady glow of the stove, and the thick walls of larch created a fragile haven against the brutal cold, the people of Yakutia never slept with complete abandon, because the Arctic night carried dangers that could emerge without warning, subtle at first, then suddenly severe, and every family developed quiet methods of vigilance that allowed them to rest while still remaining alert to the shifting threats of the winter darkness. In a land where temperatures plummeted so sharply that iron tools left outdoors snapped like glass, and even boiling water turned to snow in mid-air, the smallest change inside the house could escalate quickly into something life-threatening. One of the greatest dangers was the unpredictable fall of temperature during the late-night hours, when the cold outside deepened to its most brutal point. If the fire weakened even slightly, or if a draft forced its way through a tiny gap in the wall, the warmth inside the room could drop by several degrees in mere minutes. Families often kept a bowl of water or broth near the far wall, watching how quickly ice began to form as an early warning signal. If the surface froze too rapidly, it meant the room was losing heat, and someone needed to tend the fire immediately. In this way, even sleeping people became part of a collective effort to monitor the night, stirring briefly whenever the air felt just a little too sharp. Frostbite was another silent danger. Exposed skin, cheeks, ears, fingers could stiffen and lose sensation almost without notice, and so parents developed the habit of waking just enough to feel their children's hands and faces beneath the blankets, checking for cold patches that hinted at shifting positioning or slipping covers. Children learned to sleep in specific curled shapes, keeping limbs close to their bodies to avoid stretching an arm or leg into the colder air at the edge of the bed. Adults sometimes slipped their hands beneath the layers to make sure the younger ones were still warm, and these small touches created a rhythm of reassurance throughout the night. Smoke was also a rare but deadly threat. In the depth of winter, when doors and windows were sealed tightly, a poorly ventilated stove could cause smoke to build in the room, especially if the chimney became partially blocked by frost. Families learned to recognize the subtle difference between the warm, earthy smell of burning birch and the sharp, suffocating scent of smoke that meant something was wrong. Even while half asleep, a shift in the air would pull them awake, prompting a quick inspection of the stove, a clearing of the chimney, or a brief opening of the door to release trapped fumes, despite the blast of freezing air that rushed in. Occasionally, the Arctic itself posed sudden threats, violent windstorms that struck the house so fiercely that snow forced its way through microscopic cracks, or the sharp, explosive sound of trees splitting in the distance, echoing through the night like distant thunder. These noises were rare but unmistakable, and they caused adults to stir, listening carefully to ensure the home remained intact. If necessary, someone would rise to reinforce a window or adjust a felt covering, doing so as quietly as possible so the children could continue to sleep. Through all of this, people never thought of their vigilance as fear. Rather, it was part of the rhythm of life in Yakutia, a gentle awareness that sleep required cooperation with the fire, with the house, with the night itself. And each morning, when the faint glow of dawn finally touched the frost-covered windows, families woke not just because they had slept, but because they had watched over each other, responding to the subtle signals that allowed them to endure the harshest cold on earth. When morning finally approached in Yakutia, it did not arrive suddenly or with the bright certainty of sunrise in warmer lands. Instead, it crept slowly across the frozen horizon, a faint blue glow spreading through the sky like a soft breath of light. And inside the wooden houses, families stirred gently beneath their heavy blankets, waking not because warmth returned, but because the long duty of surviving the night had ended. The first moments of morning were always quiet and delicate, filled with the low creaking of wooden beams adjusting to slight changes in temperature, and the soft rustle of blankets as people shifted from warmth into the cold air hovering above them. The fire, now reduced to a bed of glowing embers, cast a reddish hum across the room, illuminating the frost that had gathered overnight on the walls, turning them into glittering canvases of frozen flowers and delicate crystalline branches. When someone rose to rekindle the fire, their breath puffed into small clouds that hung briefly in the air before drifting toward the ceiling, where layers of frost waited to catch the moisture. The first task of the day was to add more birch logs to the stove, breathing life back into the heat that had guarded them through the night. Only when the flames rose again, filling the room with warmth, did the real process of waking begin. Blankets were lifted slowly, carefully, because the cold that rushed in from the edges of the room felt sharp and biting after hours spent nestled in shared warmth. Children curled deeper into the hides for a few extra moments, while adults stepped onto the wooden floor, often cold enough to sting their feet even through thick socks. Fingers stiff from the night were warmed near the stove, and faces brushed gently to remove tiny frost crystals that sometimes clung to eyelashes or brows. Outside, the world was a landscape of absolute stillness. The snow, hardened overnight by the extreme cold, shimmered like glass, and every sound, whether the distant crack of a shifting tree or the crunch of footsteps in the snow, echoed across the frozen air. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys, forming thin columns that stretched upward like pale blue ribbons, refusing to disperse because the air was too heavy and too cold to carry them far. In these early hours, the village felt suspended in a kind of quiet beauty, untouched and unchanged, as if frozen in time. Animals were checked first. Dogs shook frost from their fur and wagged sleepily near the doorway, eager for warmth and breakfast. Horses exhaled thick plumes of steam, their breath turning instantly to swirling clouds that drifted like ghostly shapes over their heads. Cattle in nearby barns stamped softly in the straw, waiting for their morning feed. Life moved slowly in these hours, every movement deliberate, every task measured against the cold. Inside, once the fire grew stronger and the room warmed, families gathered for breakfast, usually warm broth, fatty cuts of meat, or hot tea infused with berries, and the first sip of heat after the long night felt like an awakening not just of the body but of the spirit. The quiet conversations that followed were soft and unhurried, as though no one wished to break the delicate peace of morning. And though sleep had been a fragile, carefully managed experience, waking brought with it a deep, silent gratitude, a sense of victory over another night in the harshest climate where humans have ever chosen to live. In Yakutia, surviving the night was never taken for granted. It was a quiet triumph, repeated thousands of times over generations, a reminder that warmth, whether from the fire, from shared bodies, or from the home itself, was something earned through patience, cooperation, and ancient knowledge passed down like a blessing. Even after the fire was rebuilt, the frost shaken gently from blankets, and the morning warmth began to seep slowly back into the wooden walls of the house, the people of Yakutia carried with them an understanding that survival in such an unforgiving climate required more than physical preparations. It required a deep emotional resilience, a strength woven into their daily lives as naturally as the threads of their woolen garments. The endless cycle of freezing nights and slow awakenings shaped their spirit in ways that few outsiders could fully comprehend, because facing temperatures of whole 76 degrees was not merely a matter of enduring the cold, but of cultivating a state of mind capable of meeting each day with quiet determination. Children were raised with a gentle awareness that the world outside was harsh but not hostile, as long as respect was given to it, and they learned early that fear of the cold only wasted energy, while understanding it, accepting it, and working with it allowed one to move through winter with a calm, steady heart. Elders taught them through stories told beside the stove, describing winters even harsher than the ones they now experienced, recounting nights when hunters returned from the taiga with frost on their eyelashes and ice in their beards, yet still carrying warmth in their voices as they spoke of perseverance and the beauty hidden within the silence of winter. This emotional strength revealed itself most clearly when families prepared for sleep each night. There was no panic, no rush, only a smooth, practiced coordination, each person fulfilling their small role, feeding the fire, arranging the hides, checking the windows, so that the household became a single organism working toward the same goal. This quiet cooperation fostered a sense of unity, a certainty that no one faced the Arctic night alone, and even the youngest children sensed the comfort that came from being part of this shared ritual. The cold, strange as it may seem, also created moments of closeness that might not have existed in warmer lands. When temperatures fell to unimaginable lows, people gathered closer beneath the blankets, speaking softly about their day or listening to the wind outside, while feeling the warmth of their loved ones pressed gently beside them. These moments, fragile yet profound, reminded them that the harshness of their environment also brought with it a greater appreciation for tenderness, for connection, and for the simple reassurance of another heartbeat nearby. Over generations, this emotional resilience became a defining feature of Yakut culture. People learned not to resent the cold, but to see it as a teacher, a force that demanded patience, discipline, and respect, qualities that shaped their character as much as their daily routines. And in this way, each night became more than a physical challenge. It became an opportunity to reaffirm their identity, their heritage, and their unbroken link to the land that sustained them. In the quiet moments just before sleep, when the fire dimmed and the house settled into stillness, many found a strange sense of comfort in the thought that their ancestors had slept in the same way, had felt the same weight of blankets, the same sting of cold on their cheeks, and the same warmth rising from their shared breath. It was as though every winter night stitched the past and present together, binding generations through a shared experience of endurance and belonging. Long before thermometers measured the cold or modern materials softened the bite of winter, the people of Yakutia relied on fragments of knowledge woven deeply into their culture, lessons passed down through countless generations who had endured the same nights, faced the same cold, and learned to read the winter with a sensitivity so refined that it felt almost instinctive. This ancient wisdom shaped every decision they made before sleep, from how high to stack the firewood to where to place a sleeping child so that their breath wouldn't freeze against their blanket. And it turned nightly survival into a subtle art, practiced without hurry and without fear. Much of this knowledge wasn't spoken aloud, but learned through observation. Children grew up watching their parents seal the door with strips of fur, an action that seemed simple but required an understanding of how cold moved through a house, slipping into the tiniest gaps and stealing warmth in silent drafts. They learned why certain logs were chosen for burning at night, why the bedding was layered in a particular order, and why everyone slept so close together, even when there seemed to be space enough to spread out. They learned to read the house not as a structure but as a living thing, one that breathed and shifted and required constant care in the long hours of darkness. And then there were the teachings that came through stories, tales told by grandparents beside the crackling stove, stories of hunters who survived blizzards by listening to the sound of wind across the snow, or of families who understood the sky so well that they could predict the coldest nights by the behavior of stars. These stories were more than entertainment. They were a way of transmitting survival strategies through memory, wrapped in narrative so they would stay intact even when the world outside was too harsh to allow for mistakes. One particularly important piece of inherited wisdom was the ability to sense subtle changes in the air inside the home, something newcomers could never detect. A Yakut elder could lie beneath the blankets and feel, in the smallest shift of temperature against their cheek, that the fire was beginning to fade, or that a draft had found its way through the stone chimney or the wooden wall. This sensitivity allowed them to rise just in time, long before the cold became dangerous. In this way, emotional calmness and physical awareness blended together, creating a mindset in which vigilance and rest existed side by side. Even the methods of making bedding, preparing hides, or insulating walls followed patterns perfected centuries earlier. The way reindeer skins were softened, the exact thickness needed for a winter quilt, the best moss to pack between logs. These skills lived in the hands and memory of generations, forming a quiet shield against the cold that no single person could have devised alone. Each task carried the weight of tradition, and in the simple act of preparing for sleep, people honored the knowledge of their ancestors, adding their own experiences to the long chain of wisdom that would guide future generations. This ancient inheritance was not seen as burden but as comfort, a reminder that the people of Yakutia did not face the night alone. They carried the strength of those who came before them woven into every decision and every ritual. And so, when they finally lay down beneath the heavy blankets, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing around them, they did so with a quiet confidence, trusting that the wisdom of the past would carry them safely through another Arctic night. As harsh as the Yakut winter was, and as unforgiving as the long Arctic night could be, people discovered that the most reliable source of comfort often came not from warmth alone, but from the steady rhythm of routine, the predictable sequence of actions that gave structure to each evening, and reassured the mind even before the body settled into sleep. In a world defined by extremes, where the cold outside threatened to swallow light, sound, and life itself, the softness of these rituals brought a quiet sense of order, allowing families to feel grounded, protected, and connected to something larger than themselves. Every task, no matter how small, held its own significance. The gentle sweep of a hand over the reindeer hides to shake off frost, the slow pouring of broth into wooden bowls, the familiar sound of birch logs being set into the stove, and the careful tucking of blankets around a child's shoulders. Each movement carried with it the weight of repetition, a kind of lived memory that reached back across generations. These rituals became anchors in the darkness, soothing the mind with their familiarity and reducing the anxiety that could otherwise take hold when the world outside turned silent and severe. For many, the sense of comfort also came from knowing that the entire family participated in these routines together. Children watched their parents seal the windows with felt, and parents watched their elders check the stove one last time before lying down. Each person understood their role, and this shared responsibility created a feeling of unity that softened the night's dangers. The cold could isolate, but ritual brought people closer, weaving them into the same thread of purpose. Even the sounds inside the house became part of this psychological sanctuary. The subtle crackling of the fire, the slow breathing of loved ones beneath the blankets, and the faint sighs of wood stretching under the weight of frost created a familiar auditory landscape, reassuring in its constancy. Over time, people came to associate these sounds with safety and warmth. They learned to drift into sleep guided by the rhythm of these soft noises, trusting that they signaled a well-prepared home. There was also a spiritual element woven into these routines. Many Yakut families offered small gestures of gratitude before sleep, touching the stove gently, whispering a quiet blessing for warmth, or acknowledging the spirits of ancestors whose wisdom allowed them to endure the harsh climate. These gestures, humble and tender, reminded them that survival was not only physical but also emotional and spiritual, rooted in a deep connection to the land and to the generations that came before. This sense of continuity created a profound calm, easing the mind into rest even as the cold pressed against the walls outside. And so, before sleep, each person found comfort in knowing that they had followed a familiar path. They had eaten, worked, tended the fire, sealed the windows, checked the bedding, shared warmth with their family, and honored the knowledge passed down to them. These nightly rituals became a kind of quiet armor against fear, turning the vast, terrifying cold of the Arctic into something manageable, something softened by the gentle certainty of routine. Even though the people of Yakutia mastered the art of surviving the Arctic night through ritual, architecture, shared warmth, and generational wisdom, there were still rare nights when the cold descended with such brutal intensity that ordinary preparations were not enough. Nights when temperatures plunged far below even the usual 60 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Celsius, and reached levels where the air itself seemed to harden, where breath froze the instant it left the lips, and where the slightest mistake, an uncovered hand, a draught unnoticed, a fire that dimmed too soon could turn dangerous in a matter of minutes. These nights demanded extraordinary measures, and the families who lived through them carried memories of such evenings with both pride and quiet reverence. On these extreme nights, the stove needed more than careful tending, it needed constant vigilance. The firekeeper would not lie down fully, but rested sitting upright, wrapped in layers of fur, feeding small pieces of split birch into the glowing chamber every hour, sometimes even more often, knowing that a moment of laxity could allow the room's temperature to fall faster than the fire could recover. The sound of the wood burning became a lifeline, and every crackle, pop, or shift in flame told its own story, whether the fire was strong, whether the logs were catching properly, whether additional pieces were needed. Windows were not just covered in felt, but sometimes double-layered, with animal hides pressed against them to stop the cold from creeping through the glass. Doors were reinforced with thick cloth and fur. Even the smallest gap was sealed with moss or rags. On the most severe nights, families sometimes moved their sleeping area closer to the stove, creating a small circle of warmth that concentrated their body heat into a single space, transforming the central area of the home into a temporary cocoon of survival. In these moments, companion animals became even more essential. Dogs curled tightly against the edges of the sleeping group, warming the perimeter like living radiators, their thick coats holding on to heat far better than any blanket could. Horses, sheltered in nearby barns, breathed clouds of steam into the cold, and their collective body heat radiated through the thin wooden walls, adding a subtle but important layer of warmth to the home. Families listened for the quiet shifting of animals outside, knowing that if the horses stirred uneasily, it often meant a sudden drop in temperature or a shift in the wind. Food, too, played a larger role on these extreme nights. Before sleep, people ate heavier meals rich in fat and broth, not just for comfort but to fuel the body's internal furnace, which had to work twice as hard to maintain warmth. Sometimes small stones heated in the stove were wrapped in cloth and placed under blankets, offering pockets of warmth that lasted through the first hours of the night. But perhaps the most extraordinary measure taken during such nights was the mindset people adopted. They entered sleep not fully relaxed but with an alertness woven gently into their rest, a light awareness that allowed them to wake at the faintest shift in air temperature or the smallest change in the fire's rhythm. It was a delicate balance between sleep and vigilance, one that required immense discipline but had been mastered over generations of living in the world's coldest inhabited region. And although these nights were harsh, almost frightening in their intensity, families often spoke of them later with a quiet pride. They had endured what few others on earth could imagine, and by working together, rising in turns, tending the fire, checking the blankets, listening to the animals, they had emerged from the most brutal trials of winter, with a deeper appreciation for warmth, for community, and for life itself. In the harshest cold, they found strength not only in their preparations but in each other. Even though families slept inside wooden homes sealed tightly against the cold, the vast Arctic sky above Yakutia continued to shape their nights, its presence felt in subtle, almost spiritual ways, guiding the rhythm of rest with its quiet beauty and ancient patterns. In a land where darkness stretched for many hours and the stars shone with a sharp clarity rarely seen in warmer climates, people learned to read the sky the way others read books, finding meaning and comfort in its glittering depth, and letting its stillness echo gently through the walls of their homes as they drifted towards sleep. On cloudless nights, the sky glowed with an intensity born from absolute cold. Stars appeared larger, brighter, and closer, their light scattering across the frozen air like tiny needles of silver, while the Milky Way stretched overhead in a long, luminous arc, so vivid that it felt almost like a pathway leading far beyond the horizon. People believed that the clarity of these lights foretold the nature of the coming night, when the stars burned fiercely against the blackness. It often meant extreme cold, and families prepared their sleeping spaces with even greater care, doubling blankets, checking the fire more often, and bracing themselves for hours of deep stillness. The northern lights, those shifting curtains of green, violet, and blue, sometimes danced across the sky, their movements so slow and silent that it seemed as though the heavens were breathing. These displays, visible even through the smallest of windows, carried a powerful psychological effect. Some families believed the lights were ancestral spirits watching over the land, and this belief brought comfort as they lay beneath their heavy blankets, feeling the night press gently around them. The quiet motion of the aurora created a sense of companionship, as though the sky itself shared in the long hours of darkness. Even those who could not see the sky from their sleeping places still felt its influence. Hunters and elders often spoke of the way the cold air interacted with starlight, creating a faint, crystalline echo that seemed to reach the earth, affecting the mood of the night. On evenings when the sky was clear, the night felt sharper, more focused, encouraging people to settle quickly into their sleeping spaces and conserve warmth. On nights when clouds covered the stars and the sky glowed softly with diffused light, the cold sometimes eased ever so slightly, and families found it easier to fall into deep, uninterrupted sleep. The moon, too, played its part. In Yakutia, a full moon in winter could illuminate entire villages with silvery light, reflecting off the snow in a glow so bright that shadows appeared on the ground even at midnight. People often paused before bed to observe the moonlight draped over rooftops, fences, and frozen rivers, its soft radiance reminding them that the world outside, though cold and silent, still held beauty. This simple act, stepping outside for a moment, letting the moonlight touch their faces, offered a sense of calm that followed them back into the house, settling into their bodies like a slow, comforting warmth. And so, even behind wooden walls lined with felt and fur, the sky remained a quiet companion, offering signals, reassurance, and a connection to the deeper rhythms of nature. The Arctic night was not merely an absence of sun, but a living presence, and its quiet influence helped soothe the mind, allowing families to surrender to rest with a sense of harmony that reached far beyond the boundaries of their homes. For the children of Yakutia, learning to sleep through the 76 degrees fall Arctic night was not simply a part of growing up, but a gentle initiation into the rhythms of their land, a slow and patient education that blended comfort with responsibility and tradition with instinct. Unlike children in warmer parts of the world, who might drift into sleep without much thought, Yakut children absorbed the knowledge of winter as naturally as breathing, internalizing the rules of survival through daily practice, stories whispered at dusk, and the quiet example of the adults around them. From a very young age, they understood that sleep was something precious, something prepared for and protected. They watched as their parents arranged the heavy reindeer hides, checked the window coverings, and measured the fire's strength before night settled completely. They learned to help in small ways, shaking out blankets, stacking a few pieces of birch near the stove, or brushing frost from the corners of the room, each task teaching them that security came from attentive hands and careful preparation. Children were always placed in the warmest part of the sleeping arrangement, nestled between adults whose bodies created a protective ring around them. This central position was both a comfort and a lesson. They felt night after night the warmth of family wrapped around them, the steady breathing of parents and grandparents, and the calm reassurance that they were never alone in facing the cold. It taught them from infancy that survival in Yakutia was communal, that warmth was shared, and that a family's strength came not from individual endurance but from togetherness. Their clothing for sleep was layered with the same care as that of adults, though often even more generously. Soft inner tunics of wool or fur hugged their small bodies, long socks covered their legs, and mittens were sometimes tied loosely around their wrists to prevent them from slipping off during the night. Older siblings often helped dress the younger ones, fastening belts, smoothing blankets, and ensuring no patch of skin remained exposed to the cold air. Through these nightly gestures, children learned kindness, responsibility, and the quiet pride of caring for one another. Stories played an important role in helping children settle into sleep. Elders told tales of brave hunters who survived blizzards by trusting their instincts, of animals who found warmth beneath the snow, and of ancestors who faced winters far harsher than the present. These stories were never frightening. Instead, they wrapped children in a sense of continuity, reminding them that they were part of a long lineage of people who had endured and flourished in this land. Listening to these soft voices in the dim glow of the stove, children absorbed not only the lessons but the calm confidence carried within them. Even the act of staying still beneath the blankets was something they learned over time. Parents would whisper gently that too much movement let the cold in, encouraging them to remain curled, tucked within the shared warmth. And as they grew older, they learned to wake at subtle changes in the room, the drop in temperature, the shift of the fire's glow, or the quiet stirring of a parent rising to tend the stove. Without being told, they learned to sense the night. And so, through years of quiet repetition and tender guidance, Yakut children grew into the knowledge of winter, their understanding shaped not by fear but by confidence, trust, and the reassuring presence of those who slept beside them. By the time they reached adolescence, sleeping through the Arctic night was no longer a challenge but a familiar rhythm, a connection to their family, their ancestors, and the frozen land that shaped their identity. Among all the members of a Yakut household, none carried a more respected or quietly powerful role during the Arctic nights than the elders, whose presence offered not only practical guidance but also emotional steadiness, providing a sense of continuity that reached far beyond the flickering firelight and into the depths of ancestral memory. To sleep through the brutal winter required more than warmth. It required the inheritance of calmness and experience, and the elders embodied these qualities in a way that comforted every generation in the room. Elders were often the last to settle into bed, and the first to wake should anything feel amiss. They possessed a remarkable sensitivity to the house's atmosphere, developed over decades of tending fires, raising children, and surviving winters that outsiders could scarcely imagine. With just a slight change in the room's air, perhaps a faint chill brushing the cheek, a subtle shift in the wood's creaking, or the quiet drop in the fire's glow, an elder would stir, adjust a log, seal a draft, or gently tuck a blanket back around a sleeping child. Their instincts were rarely wrong. They could read the night like others might read a book. This sensitivity came not only from experience but from a deep connection to the rhythms of nature. Elders remembered the stories of winters far harsher than the present, recalling nights when temperatures plunged so low that even the breath inside a house felt sharp and metallic. They had lived through blizzards that buried entire fences, through months when the sun hovered low and weak on the horizon, and through the long, eerie calm that settled over the land between storms. These memories carried quietly within them, shaped the advice they passed down, which wood to choose for certain nights, how to judge the cold by the behavior of animals, or how to recognize when frost on the window signaled a sudden drop in temperature. During the evenings before everyone lay down to sleep, elders often shared small pieces of guidance, soft reminders to place the kettle near the stove, to pull the reindeer hides a little higher, or to check the felt covering on the lowest corner of the door. These were not orders but gentle teachings, offered in the same tone one might use when passing along a cherished family recipe, and they ensured that the house settled into the night with the same wisdom that had protected countless generations before. Children, especially, found comfort in the presence of elders. Many fell asleep to the sound of a grandmother's quiet breathing, or the soft rhythm of a grandfather's stories murmured in the dim light. Elders often slept closest to the stove, not only because their bodies needed more warmth, but because they preferred to be at the center of the house's heartbeat, rising easily if needed without disturbing the others. This placement made them guardians in a literal sense, protectors of the home's warmth, watchers over the sleeping family. Their emotional presence was just as important as their vigilance. In the harshest climates, fear could grow quickly in the silence of night, yet the calm demeanor of an elder, shaped by decades of endurance, soothed the worries of younger family members. Even without words, their steady presence reminded everyone that they were safe, guided by the same hands and eyes that had weathered so many winters before. It was said in Yakutia that a house without an elder is like a fire without flame, a recognition that warmth came not only from the stove, but from the wisdom of those who had lived enough years to understand the rhythm of the land. Thus, when Yakut families slept, they did so wrapped not only in blankets and hides, but in generations of knowledge carried quietly by their elders, knowledge that watched over them, protected them, and ensured that each long night passed safely into dawn. While it was true that warmth began in the home and survival rested on the shoulders of each family within its wooden walls, the people of Yakutia understood that no household, no matter how prepared or experienced, survived the Arctic winter alone. The cold in this region was a force so immense and so relentless that it demanded cooperation not only within families but between them, weaving entire villages into networks of mutual support that extended far beyond the nightly rituals of a single home. Sleep, in this context, was not only a personal or family act but a communal achievement, shaped by the subtle presence of neighbors, distant relatives and friends who watched over one another even in darkness. Throughout the winter months, communication between homes became a silent thread connecting the entire village. People paid close attention to the smoke rising from neighboring chimneys, using it as a quiet indicator of well-being. If a chimney stopped releasing smoke for too long during the early or late hours, especially on nights when temperatures dropped to dangerously low levels, someone would pull on their thick fur coat, step out into the biting cold, and walk over to knock softly on the door. This was not seen as intrusion but as responsibility, a simple gesture that might save a family if something had gone wrong with the stove, or if an illness had struck unexpectedly. In some villages, elders or hunters took turns making late-night rounds, not as formal patrols but as caring routines woven into their daily lives. They would walk quietly through the snow, their footsteps muffled by thick fur boots, listening to the soft crackle of fires through walls, and noting whether any home seemed unusually quiet. A house that sounded too silent, too still, could be a sign of trouble. These night walkers carried small lanterns and kept an eye on barns as well, ensuring that animals remained sheltered and that no door had blown open under the force of Arctic winds. The sharing of resources was another crucial element in communal survival. When winter storms made travel impossible and hunting scarce, families with excess meat, fish, or firewood distributed supplies to neighbors with fewer reserves. This generosity was not recorded or discussed. It was simply understood as part of life. In return, those same neighbors would offer help when the weather shifted, when tools needed repairing, or when young children required additional layers of clothing. The village operated like a single, extended family, bound together by the knowledge that the cold could only be faced successfully when warmth, physical and emotional, was shared freely. Even the knowledge of how to endure the harshest nights circulated throughout the community. When someone discovered a better way to insulate a wall, layer a blanket, or keep frost from creeping into a window frame, word spread quickly, carried through conversations that took place near the stove or during brief visits between homes. This communal wisdom was a living resource, constantly evolving and strengthening as each family contributed their own small discoveries. By the time night fell, every household benefited from the collective experience of the entire village. In this way, sleep in Yakutia was never isolated, never purely an individual refuge. It existed within the broader support of a community that understood the value of watching, helping, sharing, and teaching. When families closed their doors and settled into their warm nests of blankets and hides, they did so with the comforting knowledge that beyond their walls lay a village that remained quietly attentive, sharing the responsibility of enduring the night. And as the frost thickened and the wind howled through the dark, this unspoken bond offered a warmth beyond heat, a warmth of belonging, trust, and mutual care that helped carry everyone safely through the coldest nights on Earth. Although the nights in Yakutia were defined by cold and darkness, by the soft crackle of the stove and the heavy blankets that held families close together, there was something deeper at work in those long hours, something subtle and almost invisible, that shaped the inner world of the people who lived there. For in a land where winter stretched endlessly across the horizon and silence ruled the night, the dreams of the Yakut people became intertwined with the vastness of their environment, reflecting not only their daily struggles but also their quiet resilience and their enduring connection to the land. The land itself seemed to breathe in winter, its rhythm slow and powerful, with the deep snow settling into stillness, and the frozen rivers sleeping beneath sheets of ice, so thick they sang with faint vibrations when the cold tightened its grip. This immense, almost living presence surrounded every home, pressing gently against walls, whispering through cracks, and infusing the night with a sense of calm stability. People grew up feeling that the land was not an enemy but a companion, distant, demanding, and unpredictable at times, yet also protective in its own severe way. As they slept, their dreams often mirrored this quiet vastness. Many spoke of dreams filled with soft landscapes of snow-covered forests, where reindeer moved like shadows beneath the moonlight and the sky shimmered with pale ribbons of green and blue. Others described floating above frozen rivers, hearing the muffled echoes of their own footsteps on the ice below, or wandering through dense winter fog, where the air felt thick and muted, as though the world had wrapped itself in a blanket of silence. These dreams were not frightening. Instead, they carried a deeply soothing quality, shaped by the same rhythms that guided their waking lives. Some dreams, especially those told by elders, featured ancestors walking calmly through winter scenes, offering guidance or reassurance in the form of gestures rather than words. These dreams were considered blessings, signs that the wisdom of past generations continued to flow gently into the present, helping families navigate the challenges of survival. They strengthened the bond between the living and those who had endured winters long before, reminding people that they were part of a lineage stretching back through centuries of Arctic nights. Children, too, found comfort in their dreams, which often blended reality with imagination, running with dogs across snowy fields, watching firelight scatter reflections across frost-covered windows, or hearing the soft humming of the stove transform into gentle lullabies carried by the wind. Their dreams helped them understand the land not as a cold and distant force, but as a place of wonder, full of hidden beauty waiting to be discovered. And through all these dreamscapes, whether peaceful or symbolic, quiet or vivid, there ran a single thread, the unspoken resilience of the Yakut people. In the stillness of sleep, their minds travelled through images shaped by endurance, connection, and the deep sense of belonging that came from living in harmony with a land so severe and yet so profoundly beautiful. These dreams restored the spirit, softened the edges of the harsh night, and helped each person wake with a renewed sense of strength, ready once more to face the quiet trials of winter. As the winter nights stretched on, long and unbroken, and families continued their delicate dance of warmth, vigilance, and rest, something remarkable emerged from the rhythm of life in Yakutia, a sense of deep cultural harmony between the people and the winter that shaped their world. Far from seeing the cold as an enemy or a curse, the Yakut people understood it as an ancient partner, a force that required respect and patience, a teacher that carved strength into their daily existence and wove resilience into their character. This quiet acceptance allowed them to sleep each night, not with fear, but with a calm dignity that softened even the harshest edges of the Arctic. Over centuries, winter became more than a season. It became a central pillar of their identity. The land's extreme cold shaped their clothing, their homes, their food, and even their values. Shared warmth was both literal and symbolic, reminding families that unity and cooperation were not merely virtues but necessities for survival. Patience, learned through waiting out long storms, tending slow fires, and enduring endless nights, became a guiding principle passed down across generations. And attentiveness, the ability to sense shifts in air, mood, or sound, became a quiet skill that shaped how people moved through the world, teaching them to listen to their environment with clarity and care. This deep harmony extended into every part of life. Winter festivals, though modest, often celebrated the endurance of families who had weathered the darkest months together. Elders told long stories about winters past, recounting moments of triumph and loss, weaving shared memory into the community like threads of a warm blanket. Even daily chores, breaking ice on rivers, collecting firewood, feeding animals, repairing sleds, carried an unspoken rhythm that matched the slow heartbeat of the season. And within this harmony lay a profound respect for nature. People understood the cycles of the land and the sky with a sensitivity honed through centuries. They could predict storms by the sound of wind against the trees or by the sudden restlessness of dogs. They recognized meaningful patterns in the frost, the stars, the silence. To sleep in this world was to surrender to forces far larger than oneself, trusting that by working with the land rather than against it, the night would carry them safely into morning. This relationship between people and winter also shaped their emotional landscape. The quiet of the night became a place for reflection, where individuals contemplated their place in the world, their connection to their ancestors, and the fragile beauty of the environment around them. The cold reminded them constantly of life's preciousness, of the importance of care and tenderness, of the strength found in stillness, and so each night became a small ceremony of trust in the fire, in the home, in the land, and most importantly in one another. In this way, sleep in Yakutia was not merely a pause between days, but a profound expression of cultural resilience, a ritual that reflected the harmony between human life and the immense quiet power of the Arctic. Night after night, families lay beneath their heavy blankets with a calm rooted in generations of wisdom, embraced by a winter that shaped them even as they endured it. Even though the Arctic night was harsh, long, and demanding, the people of Yakutia carried within them a quiet appreciation for the subtle beauty that lived beneath the cold, a beauty that revealed itself not through warmth or color, but through small, delicate details that softened the darkness and added a sense of wonder to each winter evening. In this frozen world, beauty was not something loud or obvious. It was something that appeared in moments of stillness, discovered slowly the way a candle flame reveals shapes in a dimly lit room. Inside the home, the play of firelight against the walls created shifting patterns that resembled shimmering constellations, each flicker illuminating tiny frost crystals clinging to wooden beams like intricate lace. The stove's warm glow cast soft orange halos across the blankets, blending with the pale blue light of the moon that filtered faintly through thick felt curtains. Even as families prepared for sleep, these gentle contrasts filled the room with a sense of warmth that was not merely physical but emotional, reminding everyone that the night held its own quiet magic. Outside, The world transformed into a landscape of frozen artistry. Ice feathers formed on window panes in delicate spirals, each one unique, each one melting slightly under a breath before refreezing in a new shape. The snow, packed tightly under the weight of extreme cold, glistened like powdered glass, catching the faintest moonlight and scattering it in tiny sparks of silver. On certain nights, when the air was perfectly still, the snowflakes falling from the sky shimmered like stars, so small, so dry, and so cold that they seemed weightless, drifting silently through the darkness. People found beauty in the sounds of winter too, sounds that existed nowhere else in the world. The sharp crack of frozen rivers, shifting beneath their icy lids, echoed like distant drums, while the frost settling on the trees produced faint, delicate pops that punctuated the stillness. The wind, though often bitter, carried strange and gentle voices as it swept over the frozen earth, creating tones that blended with the night's silence to form something almost musical, almost sacred. Even the animals added to this quiet beauty. Horses stood like statues in their barns, their breath rising in soft clouds that danced slowly before disappearing into the cold. Dogs curled up against the walls, their fur dusted with snowflakes that sparkled briefly before melting. Birds perched silently in the branches of sleeping trees, tiny silhouettes made fragile by the weight of winter, their stillness a reminder of the calm that settled over the land. And in the midst of all this frozen beauty, people found a strange comfort. The extreme cold made every flicker of warmth, every spark of firelight, every shared breath under the blankets feel precious and meaningful. In a world shaped by ice and darkness, small moments of softness became treasures. A whispered conversation in the dim glow of the stove, the quiet rustle of blankets as a child shifted in sleep, the gentle scent of birch smoke lingering in the air. For the Yakut people, winter did not merely test their endurance, it refined their ability to see beauty where others might see only hardship. The night taught them to look closely, to notice the small miracles hidden within the cold, and to carry these moments with them like warm embers through the long darkness. And as they slept, surrounded by the soft glow of the fire and the stillness of the frozen world outside, this appreciation for winter's quiet beauty helped ease their minds, allowing them to drift into dreams with a sense of peace. For the people of Yakutia, waking up after a night spent in temperatures that could fall to 76 degrees here was not simply the start of a new day. It was a small, quiet triumph, a moment filled with gratitude that settled gently over the household like the soft glow of dawn creeping through frost-covered windows. Survival, especially in the depths of Arctic winter, was never taken for granted, and each morning carried with it a sense of accomplishment that ran deeper than words, woven into the very rhythms of life. When the first hint of light touched the sky, turning the horizon a pale shade of silver blue, families stirred beneath their heavy blankets, and the first breaths of morning felt warmer simply because they were shared. The slow rustle of reindeer hides, the quiet sighs of those stretching beneath the blankets, and the muffled padding of socks on wooden floors created a gentle tapestry of sound that signaled safety, that the night's dangers had passed and warmth had held strong until dawn. The fire, often reduced to glowing embers, was quickly revived, and the moment the new flames caught, licking upward in thin orange ribbons, the entire room seemed to exhale in relief. Adults warmed their hands near the stove, watching frost melt in tiny droplets on kettles and iron pots, while children peered sleepily from beneath blankets, their cheeks flushed from the heat of many bodies pressed together through the night. The morning warmth carried with it the reassurance that another day had been earned through patience and vigilance. Stepping outside, even briefly, reaffirmed the magnitude of what they had endured. The cold air, sharper in the morning than at any other time, bit instantly at exposed skin, and the world stood frozen in perfect stillness, as though time itself had paused. Frost lay thick upon fences and rooftops, turning every surface into a canvas of glittering crystals. The snow beneath their feet was so dense from the night's extreme cold that it cracked sharply with each step, sending echoes across the silent landscape. Villagers often greeted one another with simple nods or quiet words as they checked their homes and barns. Yet hidden beneath these small gestures was the unspoken understanding that each family had passed another test of winter. The survival of every neighbor added to the collective strength of the community. When they saw smoke rising from distant chimneys curling upward in slow, pale trails, they felt comforted knowing that warmth had held in those homes as well. Children, unaware of the full weight of survival, greeted the morning with cheerful curiosity, tracing patterns in the frost on windows, or marveling at the way their breath formed tiny clouds in the air. Their innocence brought joy to the adults, reminding them that even in the harshest climates, life persisted with stubborn beauty. There was always work to be done, fetching water from frozen rivers, feeding animals, checking sleds and tools. But mornings after the coldest nights carried a special energy, a kind of quiet pride that made each task feel meaningful. People moved with a steadiness shaped by generations of endurance, knowing that while winter demanded constant vigilance, it also fostered a deep unity among them. And when the sun finally rose higher, casting pale beams across the horizon and revealing the full brilliance of the frozen landscape, families felt a warmth that had nothing to do with fire, a warmth born from resilience, cooperation, and the ancient knowledge that had carried them safely through the night. Even though the world has changed and technology has reached even the most remote stretches of Siberia, the people of Yakutia continue to live in a place where winter is not simply a backdrop to daily life, but a constant force that shapes everything from architecture to mood. And while many modern homes now have insulation, heating systems, and electric lights that soften the cold's ancient bite, the deeper traditions, those that once kept entire villages alive through 76-degree-Celsius nights, still linger quietly in the background, woven into the behaviors and instincts of the people who call this frozen land home. Many families today sleep in warm apartments or well-insulated wooden houses, yet the old habits remain. People still check windows for drafts out of instinct. Even if the glass is modern and the frames tightly sealed, they still place heavy blankets on their beds, not because they must, but because it feels right. A comforting echo of the generations who slept beneath reindeer hides and layers of felt. Some families keep small stoves or fireplaces alight during the coldest spells, not for survival but for the familiar sound and smell that connects them to their heritage. Even the practice of gathering close during the night persists, though now it is more emotional than physical. Parents still tuck their children in carefully, ensuring their cheeks and hands are warm, and children still fall asleep faster when they hear the soft hum of the wind outside, a sound that once warned their ancestors of danger, but now carries a strange nostalgia. The sense of communal warmth, once essential for survival, has transformed into a cultural comfort, a reminder that closeness remains at the heart of Yakut identity. In rural areas, many families continue to live in traditional-style wooden homes where winter's power is still deeply felt. These households blend modern conveniences like electric heaters with old practices such as stacking wood near the stove, sealing windows with fabric curtains, and layering bedding according to the same patterns used centuries ago. Hunters and reindeer herders, who spend nights deep in the taiga, still rely on age-old sleeping methods. Thick fur blankets, tightly sealed tents, fire kept alive through the night. Because in the wilderness the cold is as unforgiving as ever. Animals remain part of nightly life too. Modern Yakutian laikas still curl beside doors or near heaters, their instincts unchanged, acting as both companions and quiet guardians of the home. Horses in remote villages sleep in barns built close to living quarters, just as they did in the past, their warmth radiating through the wooden walls during the coldest nights. These practices, though no longer strictly necessary in all places, preserve a sense of continuity, a living link between past and present. Technology has brought new comforts: electric kettles that never freeze, thick insulation boards, heated floors, sturdy thermal windows. But even these advancements cannot erase the deep respect people feel for the Arctic night. When temperatures plunge to record lows, modern Yakut families still prepare in ways that mirror their ancestors, checking heaters, stocking extra firewood, gathering warm blankets, and ensuring every member of the household is safe and comfortable before sleep. And perhaps the most enduring part of this blend between old and new is the mindset. The calm, deliberate way of approaching the night, the instinctive awareness of temperature, the quiet rituals performed before bed, all remain unchanged by time. Even in cities, people speak with reverence about winter, about the night, about the cold, strange beauty, as though honoring a silent agreement with the land that has shaped their history. Thus, modern Yakutia lives in a delicate balance between comfort and tradition, where the harshness of winter is softened by technology but never forgotten, and where people still sleep each night with the same quiet respect for the cold that kept their ancestors alive. Even as Yakutia steps further into the modern age, with insulated homes, electric heaters, and technologies that make the cold less threatening than it once was, there remains an unbroken chain of winter wisdom that continues to flow quietly from one generation to the next, carrying with it the essence of what it truly means to sleep through an Arctic night. This wisdom is not taught through books or formal lessons, but through daily living, through small gestures, shared stories, and the instinctive respect that every Yakut child learns to feel for the cold from the moment they first open their eyes to a world of frost. In every household, whether in a rural cabin or a city apartment, certain traditions survive because they feel right, because they offer comfort, or simply because they honor the memory of those who endured winters without the aid of modern tools. Parents still show their children how to pull blankets up to their shoulders, how to tuck hands and feet beneath warm layers, and how to read the quiet signals of a room. They teach them to notice the subtle shifts in temperature, to recognize the sound of the wind that hints at approaching storms, and to treat the night with a calm attentiveness born from generations of necessity. Elders continue to share stories of the past, stories of nights so cold that even the stars seemed brittle, stories of hunters who survived because they trusted their instincts, stories of families who weathered storms by relying on nothing more than fire, blankets, and the closeness of loved ones. These tales are no longer warnings but gifts, reminders that the strength of the Yakut people was built not on comfort but on resilience, cooperation, and a profound understanding of the environment in which they lived. Schools and cultural centers in Yakutia preserve these traditions as well, teaching young people about the old ways of insulating houses, preparing fur bedding, and caring for livestock in harsh conditions. Even though many will never need to rely on these skills, they learn them as a way of honoring their heritage, of keeping alive the knowledge that once safeguarded entire communities through winters of unimaginable severity. And there is something deeply comforting in this continuity. When a child pulls on a thick wool sock before bed, or when a parent checks the window for drafts on a particularly cold night, they are echoing the same actions performed by ancestors hundreds of years ago. When a family gathers near a stove for warmth, they are repeating a ritual that has remained unchanged across countless winters. Every layer of tradition adds to the sense of belonging, creating a quiet connection to the land that endures even as the world evolves. This unbroken chain of winter wisdom extends beyond practicality. It shapes identity. It teaches patience, gratitude, and the quiet understanding that survival is achieved not through fear, but through knowledge, respect, and the simple, steady care that people show one another. And so long as families in Yakutia continue to share these lessons, through their words, their actions, and their gentle nightly rituals, the spirit of those who once battled the cold with only their hands, their fire, and their courage will never be forgotten. In this way, the future of Yakutia remains rooted in its past, with each new generation carrying forward the traditions that once turned the world's harshest winters into nights of warmth, safety, and quiet sleep. Even though the focus of Yakut life during winter was often on surviving the coldest nights, those long, silent hours when the world outside seemed carved from ice and starlight, the truth is that the cold shaped far more than sleep. It shaped the rhythm of the people's hearts, the calmness in their voices, and the quiet resilience that lived within them from childhood to old age. In Yakutia, the winter was not merely a season, it was an ancient presence that influenced every part of life, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the warmth of the bed. The cold taught humility. It reminded people each day that nature was vast, powerful, and indifferent, and that survival required not defiance but cooperation. This humility seeped into their attitudes and relationships, encouraging patience and respect in daily interactions. People spoke softly, moved deliberately, and approached problems with a slow, steady determination that mirrored the quiet persistence of winter itself. The cold also taught gratitude. In places where warmth is scarce, every flicker of fire, every shared blanket, every bowl of hot broth carried meaning. Families learned to notice the smallest comforts, the glow of embers in the stove, the gentle closeness of children sleeping nearby, the soft breath of a dog curled at their feet. These tiny moments, so easily overlooked in warmer climates, became precious reminders that life's simplest forms of warmth have the greatest power to soothe. The cold fostered unity. Even in modern Yakut towns and villages, where technology eases the burden, people instinctively check on one another when the temperature plunges too low, just as their ancestors did. A neighbor's chimney without smoke still raises concern. An elderly person's quiet house still prompts a gentle knock on the door. Winter created a culture in which survival was shared, and that spirit of mutual care remains deeply rooted in the community's identity. The cold also nurtured endurance. Those who grew up in Yakutia did not fear hardship. They learned to meet it with calm resolve. Whether waking early to tend animals, traveling long distances through snow, or sleeping through nights that felt endless, they developed an inner strength that was rarely spoken aloud but clearly visible in the way they moved through the world. It was a strength built not from force but from steadiness, a strength that came from trusting their own ability to face whatever winter brought. And finally, the cold taught appreciation for the fleeting beauty woven through the darkness, the soft shimmer of frost on wooden beams, the slow dance of the northern lights, the delicate hush that settled over the village when temperatures dropped to their lowest. These moments reminded people that even the harshest environments hold breathtaking wonders for those who learn to see them. Thus, the cold shaped not only how Yakut families slept, but how they lived, loved, and understood their place in the world. It taught them that warmth, whether from fire, from family, or from the quiet resilience within, was something to be cherished. It taught them that togetherness was strength. It taught them that beauty can be found even in hardship. And as families lay beneath their blankets each night, wrapped in centuries of wisdom, and bound together by shared rituals, they carried within them this deeper understanding that the cold, for all its severity, was also a silent teacher, guiding their people through the long winter with lessons of patience, gratitude, unity, endurance, and quiet awe. Throughout history, travelers, explorers, traders, and curious wanderers have passed through Yakutia, drawn by the stories of unimaginable cold and the quiet strength of the people who called this frozen land home. And although they came bundled in furs, armed with modern gear, or filled with confidence from surviving winters elsewhere, nothing truly prepared them for the experience of trying to sleep the way Yakut families slept through the harshest Arctic nights. Their attempts revealed not only the challenges of the cold, but the depth of knowledge required to rest safely in such an unforgiving environment. Many visitors underestimated the cold at first. They believed that layering clothing and piling blankets would be enough, only to discover within minutes that warmth in Yakutia was not something passive but something actively maintained. They felt the cold seep through floorboards, through wall beams, through the smallest gaps around windows, tiny currents of air that carried a sharpness unlike anything they had ever known. Even lying beneath thick covers, they were surprised to feel the air around their faces tighten, becoming almost metallic as the temperature dipped further during the night. Some visitors tried to sleep alone, perhaps out of politeness or habit, but quickly learned that isolation was the enemy of warmth. Without another body nearby, heat escaped too quickly. leaving them shivering despite layers of wool and fur. Yakut families often smiled gently when they saw this, explaining that shared warmth was not merely tradition but science. One body alone could not retain heat as effectively as several together. When visitors finally slept among their hosts, nestled close in the center of the bed, they often felt a comfort they had not expected, the reassurance of breathing in unison, the warmth of many bodies forming a protective cocoon that pushed the cold outward. Visitors also struggled with the silence, the deep Arctic quiet, so absolute that even a heartbeat could feel loud, unsettled those from bustling cities or warmer regions. They lay awake listening to the stillness, to the occasional pop of freezing wood, to the soft howl of wind outside, and they realized that sleeping in Yakutia required embracing the silence rather than resisting it. Only when they surrendered to that calm, letting their minds soften and drift like snow settling on the ground, did they finally fall asleep. The fire was another revelation. Many were surprised by how much skill it required to keep the stove burning at exactly the right pace through the night. They tended to overfeed it, causing the room to grow too warm and melt frost on the walls, only for that moisture to freeze again later, creating sheets of ice that stole warmth from the air. Others added too little wood, allowing the temperature to fall dangerously low. They soon understood why Yakut families treated the fire like a living being, one that needed attention, understanding, and respect. Perhaps the most humbling lesson for visitors was realizing how much emotional calmness the Yakut people possessed. While outsiders often approached the night with tension or worry, Yakut families moved through their routines with a quiet confidence born from centuries of experience. Travelers felt this calmness settling into their own bodies as they followed their host's lead, moving slowly, speaking softly, arranging bedding with deliberate care, and preparing for sleep as though preparing for a gentle ceremony. By the time visitors left Yakutia, many carried with them not only admiration but a newfound understanding of what it meant to be resilient, patient, and attentive. They realized that sleeping through an Arctic night was not simply about staying warm, it was about adopting a mindset shaped by respect for nature, by shared responsibility, and by the wisdom of those who had lived in harmony with the cold for centuries. And often these visitors spoke of their nights in Yakutia with a quiet awe, remembering the glow of the stove, the weight of warm blankets, the soft breathing of families sleeping close together, and the strange, serene beauty of a world where warmth was not taken for granted, but cherished with every heartbeat. To the outside world, the Arctic night in Yakutia might appear as nothing more than a long stretch of darkness and cold, a vast quiet in which survival requires constant vigilance. But for the people who have lived there for centuries, the night carries a symbolic depth that goes far beyond its physical challenges, shaping stories, beliefs, and ways of understanding life itself. It is a time when the world slows down, when the boundary between the seen and the unseen grows thin, and when the invisible ties between generations feel closer and more alive. In older times, Yakut families believed that the night was when the spirits of the land moved most freely, drifting between forests, rivers, and homes with a gentle, watchful presence. This belief was not filled with fear but with quiet respect, for the spirits were thought to guide and protect those who honored the rhythms of winter. Before sleeping, some families would gently touch the walls of their homes or murmur short blessings near the stove, offering gratitude for warmth and safety. These gestures were small, but they reminded everyone that the night was not simply an absence of light, it was a living presence filled with memory and meaning. The night also represented reflection. In the coldest months when work slowed and travel became difficult, people spent long evenings gathered near the fire, speaking softly, sharing stories, and contemplating their thoughts. Darkness encouraged introspection, allowing each person to explore the quiet corners of their mind. Even children absorbed this slow rhythm, learning to sit peacefully, to listen, and to feel the comfort of simply being together in stillness. In a world where silence is rare, the Yakut night offered a kind of peace that softened the heart. Dreams carried symbolic weight too. Many Yakut people believed that dreams during winter nights held deeper messages, shaped by the energy of the season. Ancestors might appear in these dreams, offering comfort or subtle guidance. Animals, especially horses, wolves, and reindeer, often symbolize strength, intuition, or endurance, and scenes of snow-covered landscapes or frozen rivers could carry meanings about patience, change, or hidden beauty. When families woke in the morning, they sometimes shared these dreams over warm tea, finding in them a quiet reassurance that the night had been more than just a fight against the cold. It had been a conversation with something ancient. The night also taught balance. It reminded people that life moves between extremes, light and dark, warmth and cold, silence and sound, and that survival comes not from resisting these cycles but from embracing them. This understanding shaped the Yakut character, creating a culture that valued harmony over struggle, steady effort over urgency, and connection over isolation. Sleeping through the night became a symbolic act of trust. Trust in the home, in the fire, in each other, and in the vast landscape that held them. Even today, as modern life brings new comforts and distractions, the deeper meaning of the night remains. People still feel a unique calm when the sun dips below the horizon and the cold intensifies. They still step outside for a brief moment before bed, letting the crisp air touch their faces and the stars settle gently into their minds. And when they return indoors, to warm rooms lit by soft lamps or the familiar glow of a fire, they carry with them a renewed appreciation for the delicate balance that has shaped their culture for centuries. In this way, the night in Yakutia is not merely endured, it is understood, respected, and embraced as a symbol of endurance, unity, and the quiet strength that lives within the people of the Arctic. Even though the nights of Yakutia were harsh, long, and filled with dangers that required constant attentiveness, the people who lived there carried within them a quiet pride, an unspoken understanding that they belonged to one of the most resilient cultures on Earth, forged by winters that few outsiders could imagine, and strengthened by traditions that had survived through countless generations. This pride was not loud or boastful. It was soft, steady, and woven into the simplest moments of life, like the warmth of a hand, the glow of a fire, or the sigh of a house settling under frost. For Yakut families, the ability to sleep through the coldest nights was not seen as a heroic feat, but as a natural part of who they were, something learned in childhood, passed down through rituals, and embedded in the everyday fabric of their culture. They did not wake each morning thinking of survival. They thought of chores, family, and the day ahead. Yet beneath these routines lay a profound awareness that every peaceful night's rest was earned, protected, and worthy of respect. This quiet pride could be felt most strongly during the harshest winters, when temperatures plunged deeper than the elders had predicted, and even the fire struggled to keep pace with the cold. In these moments, families moved with a calm efficiency born from experience. No one panicked, no one rushed. Instead, each person stepped into their role, feeding the fire, securing the blankets, checking the windows with the same steady purpose. Their composure came not from ignoring the danger, but from understanding it intimately, from having lived with it all their lives. There was pride, too, in the knowledge that their ancestors had endured nights far colder, before modern tools, before insulated walls, before electric heaters. When elders spoke of these earlier times, their voices carried both reverence and admiration. They remembered how entire communities had survived winters when the snow swallowed barns and the cold froze even the strongest men's eyelashes together. These stories were reminders that the people of Yakutia were part of a chain that stretched back through centuries, a chain that had never broken no matter how fierce the cold became. Visitors often noticed this pride, though it was never spoken aloud. They saw it in the way families tended their fires with care, in the way they moved through the frozen world with steady steps, in the way they spoke fondly of winter as though it were both challenge and companion. For outsiders, these gestures appeared almost effortless, but for Yakut people they represented generations of knowledge and the strength that lives quietly within those who choose to remain in such a place. The pride extended beyond survival. It touched identity. The cold shaped their values, their stories, their sense of community. It taught them patience, calmness, endurance, and a deep appreciation for warmth in all its forms: physical warmth, emotional warmth, the warmth of connection and shared rituals. To sleep safely through the Arctic night meant trusting in these values, preserving them and passing them forward. And so, as families lay beneath their blankets, listening to the slow breath of the night pressing gently against their homes, they were wrapped not only in hides and wool, but in a confidence inherited from countless winters lived and endured. This quiet pride, steady as the flame in the stove, reminded them that they were part of something rare, a culture shaped by the world's coldest inhabited land, strengthened by its challenges, and made beautiful by its traditions. Although the world of Yakutia is distant for most people, a remote land of frozen rivers, reindeer herds, wooden homes, and long Arctic nights, the lessons born from its coldest hours reach far beyond its borders, carrying quiet truths about endurance, connection, and the simple, powerful act of caring for one another. In the way Yakut families prepared for sleep, in the rituals that guided them through darkness, and in the unspoken strength that carried them from night to morning, there were teachings that resonated across cultures, climates, and centuries, offering a deeper understanding of what it means to live and rest with intention. Perhaps the first lesson is that warmth is not merely physical. The fire that glowed in the center of a Yakut home was certainly essential, but so was the warmth of bodies sleeping close together, the warmth of a calm voice guiding children into sleep, the warmth of knowing that neighbors watched for smoke in your chimney, and the warmth of shared memory stretching back through generations. These forms of warmth, emotional, communal, ancestral, were just as vital as the heat of the stove, and they remind us that human connection remains the most enduring shelter in any environment. Another lesson is the value of slowness. In the Arctic night, rushing was dangerous. Moving too quickly let in cold, wasted energy, or disrupted the delicate rhythm of the fire. Instead, families learned to act with intention, to place each log carefully, to adjust each layer of bedding with gentleness, to listen closely to the sounds of the wind. This deliberate pace created a sense of calm and stability that shaped not only how they slept, but how they approached life. In a world often overwhelmed by speed, Yakutia teaches that survival and peace come from steady, mindful action. There is also a lesson of humility. The Yakut people understood that nature was vast, unpredictable, and deserving of respect. They knew that even the strongest person could not conquer the cold alone, and so they embraced cooperation over pride, community over isolation. This humility made them strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical might. It reminds the rest of the world that resilience is not about dominating nature, but about understanding it, working with it, and accepting the limits of one's strength. The night also teaches about the beauty hidden in difficulty. Frost on windows, silence so deep it feels sacred, the soft glow of a stove reflected in children's eyes. These are moments born from hardship, yet they carry a gentle kind of beauty that only those who endure can fully appreciate. It reminds us that even in the harshest circumstances, life leaves room for wonder, and that comfort can be found in small, fleeting details if one learns to look closely. And finally, the Yakut night teaches about legacy. The methods used to survive the coldest nights were not inventions of a single lifetime, but the accumulation of countless experiences passed down with care. This reminds us that we too inherit wisdom from those who came before, and that our own actions, our compassion, our patience, our steadiness, become part of the legacy we leave behind. In this way, the lessons of a Yakut night extend far beyond the Arctic Circle. They speak to the universal need for connection, for mindful living, for humility before nature, for appreciation of small beauty, and for honoring the wisdom of those who walked before us. And as people everywhere lay down to sleep, seeking rest after long days, the quiet strength of Yakutia offers a gentle reminder that even in the coldest hours of life, warmth can be found in each other, in our traditions, and in the calm resilience that lives quietly within every human heart. And so, as we arrive at the quiet conclusion of this long journey through the frozen nights of Yakutia, it becomes clear that the story of how people slept through 76 degrees Celsius of darkness is not simply a tale of fires, blankets, and wooden walls, but something deeper, something rooted in human resilience, shared memory, and the calm endurance that shines brightest in the harshest places on Earth. The Arctic night, vast and silent, pressed softly into the lives of those who lived beneath it, shaping their habits, their wisdom, their families, and even the tone of their dreams. When a Yakut family lay down to sleep, they did not merely rest their bodies, they stepped into a space crafted by generations, a sanctuary of shared warmth, quiet vigilance, and deep respect for the world just beyond their door. The cold outside was overwhelming, but so was their knowledge. The darkness was long, but so was their patience. The silence was immense, but so was their unity. In the dim orange glow of the stove, with the soft rustling of blankets and the slow rise and fall of breathing around them, each night became a gentle ceremony of trust. Trust in the fire to hold its glow, trust in the thick walls to keep the warmth inside, trust in their loved ones lying close, forming a circle of safety, and trust in themselves that they had prepared well, that they understood the cold, that they carried within them the strength of countless ancestors who had survived nights even harsher than this one. By morning, when the first pale light touched the frost-blurred windows and the embers began to brighten again, families did not wake with triumph but with gratitude, gratitude that the night had passed safely, that the warmth had endured, and that the quiet rhythm of life would continue for another day. This gratitude, steady and humble, was perhaps their greatest strength, for it filled even the most unforgiving nights with meaning. The story of Yakutia's coldest nights is, at its core, a story about human endurance, about how people can bend without breaking, endure without fear, and find beauty in places where the world seems carved from ice and silence. It reminds us that warmth is not only heat but closeness, that strength is not loud but patient, and that survival is not merely a physical act but an emotional one, held together by memory, by connection, and by the quiet determination that guides people through darkness. And as the Arctic night comes to an end, while the stove crackles softly and the world outside slowly brightens beneath the shy morning sun, one final truth settles gently over everything. Even in the coldest inhabited region on Earth, people have learned not only to survive, but to live with warmth, with calmness, and with a deep, enduring sense of peace.